Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the third session of Globalization before Modernism. Today's session is called Technics and Images. You already are familiar with Zigam and Zigam's work, so I think we can begin the session. Zigam, over to you.
Thank you very much, Satyajit. Very good to see you again. And yes, basically, I'm going today to be a little bit schematic. Just it's not that it is concluding remarks on our three-part talk, but sort of, so to speak, with more conclusion, yet just trying to bring together why we were talking about these questions. Which is also about today's what artists and what art can do, what images can do. So first we talked about the importance of being non-essentialist, yes, and very straightforwardly. A second part was about the importance of classifications, nevertheless, being not dogmatic in classifying things. In other words, classification should also be taking into account the questions of contingencies and everything else in order to escape to become a blueprint. And that was one of the main critiques against Kant, for example, because Kant wanted to find a blueprint. So which otherwise Kant is genius. I already said it many times. I know many people find it too, but anyway, I will talk a little bit about him today also. But as I said, very schematically, just to go on to say that we accept contingencies as a way of thinking, thinking of contingency as how we should approach the exterior world, basically, which, for example, but contra some speculative realist philosophers, like especially Quentin Meillassoux, I am much more about the fact that who says we should recognize contingencies only without going further to recognize, like, for example, he talks about Nietzsche talking about the will, or Deleuze talking about desire, or for example, Hegel talking about, synthesis, etc. But I disagree with that because I think contingencies also provide conditions. Contingency is an event, after all. I mean, as if event takes place, then they provide conditions. So far, but I love, again, I love the brave philosophy of Quentin Meillassoux, who brings into existence very important questions after thousands of years when we always want to take things by reason. We must also believe that there is something called contingency. And that is exactly what we were talking before we started the conversation about the three-time choice, basically.
Yes.
But again, contingencies provide conditions. And birth taking place in time and as time. This is very important. But a third very important thing which to know is that time indeterminate, not only contingent, but also indeterminate. This indeterminacy is very important to keep in our mind. Even it is very important also in terms of non-essentialist thinking. It's important also in terms of classifying things. We always have to know that this is sort of convenience, sort of, so to speak, agreement, social agreement, yes? And very importantly, these things which I just mentioned, they produce two very important, in my opinion, things that are that we call our talk today: techniques and images. First, about the use of term techniques in the plural, not the technique, not the technology, not the technicality, but techniques. For myself, since my thesis, doctorate, but before that too, but more organized, in a more organized way, in a more structured way, however contingent, I became very interested in understanding not just single technology, but when I am I must tell you, two sources are very important for me. First is Louis Mumford, whose work, Techniques and Civilization, I consider as one of the most important books written, it was published in 1934, which is much earlier concerns about ecological problems, much earlier concerns about people's getting mad, about capitalism absolutely destroying human individuality, these things, but also, of course, his consideration of techniques. Second person is Bernard Stiegler. First, few words about Louis Mumford's use of techniques. Well, basically, Louis Mumford talks about techniques in the plural because he thinks that technology is just one of the techniques, because there are so many different techniques. And it is very important politically also, because in his opinion, who was also very important in terms of understanding of city planning, for example, urbanism, yes? And he was saying, look, if we don't understand that techniques are inherent in human, for entire existence of human, like we will clarify further, like now we speak, it's also technique, it's all techniques. But what is the problem? Why we're always stuck, and why it is very important to be non-essentialist and not just for the sake of it, and try to be careful in classifying things, to take into account love-hate relationship. Because if we privilege one technique, it becomes an obstacle for another technique. Yes? Louis Mumford's interesting example is that walking in the street, for example, is challenged by another technique which became an obstacle, car driving, for example. But they should not be, even though we have pavements, everything, but this is really not, well, it is his example. But I also believe that our today's world of proliferation of techniques, we also should understand that the coming of the internet should not become an obstacle for anything else. Although the more on the other way around, more techniques we have, more possibilities we have. We can choose very different things. So this is very important to understand. I think it is extremely important also in relation to understanding of images and art, which I will talk about a little bit further. So Mumford understanding was also a technique, was also remarkable for me, also because of his taking, his understanding of technique in general was much closer to Greek notion of techne, which I also take. But Greek notion of techne is taking many different techniques, like he says, skills, but I also skills, and I also believe knowledge, but also thought. But Mumford also thought Greeks also thought dexterity and know-how is also technique. It's very important. And he liked to use two very important things. Like, first of all, we have, and of course, all this together, all this becomes polytechnical. Many techniques, yeah, like in this term, very beautiful term, myriad-minded man, like Rabindranath Tagore's book. Yeah, so we have to think about it. Of course, that is extremely important. Nobody says that we have to be myriad-minded, but better if we try. That is really important. So polytechnics. Why? Because politically also it helps us to escape. It is becoming an obstacle. Also there is not such a thing anyway, because well, if we talk about indeterminacy, we have to find. That is why this dexterity. That's why artistic attitude matters here very much. For me, everything comes to something that becomes an artwork. All these conversations are all about this. So, but this, by the way, I just want to mention here in terms of taking thought and images also as techniques into account as techniques has been, of course, talked about before, but not, well, even now it is still under development. But I think soon, very soon, it will become much more important conversation, but just as we speak now. For example, even Plato, talking about imitation, Plato at one point resembles writing, painting to writing as well. I mean, painting and writing has a lot of similarities because both are imitation. But one more example I want to give, a very important example of a legendary figure of Douglas, Frederick Douglass, who was very much more famous for his revolutionary way of escaping from the slave ship, freeing himself from slavery, becoming one of the outspoken personalities of America, excuse me, 19th century, and who was also very much attracted to images. And unfortunately, he's not a thinker, but I think he was a great philosopher. Because also he was using very different techniques. Apart from writing, he was also a very important narrator. He was, like in the old Greek culture, Eastern countries speaking, very important. One of his narrations took place in 1861, where he said something very interesting. It is absolutely outrageous. People are talking about steam engine, about trains, everything as a new technology. But why what Louis Daguerre invented, this French inventor of photography, why it is not invention? Images are also invention. And then in another place on pictures, even earlier, he says that the liberational capacity of images. Images, like trains, take one from one place to another, the possibility of connecting different places, almost or even invisible places. And the term, again, Louis Mumford used for this very interesting fungibility of techniques. They are transferable because they are fungibility. They cannot be, again, defined that purely like a technique. It has to be in plural, like techniques. And of course, this transferability, if it's possible to use this, being transferable, gives rise to the proliferation of images, which I will come back to in a minute. Second person, as I promised, to say again a few words. I know I've talked about it before, but it is important, nevertheless, to underline, especially in relation to today's talk, was Bernard Stiegler, who said that techniques is unthought, philosophical aspect. Technique is unthought, that techniques became a domain of thought, as, for example, question of time is, or question of space is. But this is real question, because thinking of techniques helps us to understand that actually human itself is a technique. He goes even further than Louis Mumford. It is not that technicality and techniques like driving, skills, dexterity, etc. But human itself is a technique. And here's a very interesting example. I just very briefly remind, I talked before, André Lerard-Gourand paleontological study of early humans, bipedalism, when standing upright, open the face for visual contact with the world, and open hands, free hands for gesticulation, which was the first language. But these are also techniques. Important thing was, of course, to remember this technique in order to survive. So his use of techniques involves almost similar to Louis Mumford, but also saying that there is something very interesting about techniques, that they are generational. They produce generations. Literally, when we talk about political term, generations, because these skills pass to other generations also. Techniques are passed to other generations also. So anyway, these questions today, as I said, will become nolens volens. You want it or you don't want it. Very important, necessary to talk in our times. Extremely important. I'm not going into politics to bring some examples. What is problems, for example, why suddenly Tesla became such a big fuss. Yeah, just this car is something which you should buy. Yeah, people say you can buy other cars. You see what I mean? These obstacles are produced. I'm just giving an example. We have to look at this and to understand why these obstacles, even in political terms. So therefore, we have to talk about this proliferation, this transferability, all this question and techniques, because this is really techniques. I believe now. I want to add to all this what I said. I believe that images also are techniques. You know, images are techniques. They are really like skills, because one images are usually what is very interesting about this. They are transferable. They are fungible. They are not totally determined. You know, in art, for example, you can use the same motifs used by Rembrandt and to make a new portrait in 21st century too. And we can give many examples. Excuse me, I have little water. Many examples, but I like very much in 1970s. There was a film theorist, Christian Metz, French film theorist, very interesting. He called so many films are made in 1970s. He said it is frenzy of visible. That he used this term, but I think our times is frenzy of visible, but which is because this constant proliferation of techniques and images, which we are often not able to grasp. If you remember in one of my sessions, we're talking with a young curator, I said that to grasp things is a very important quality of an artist. This is also dexterity that we talk about. Being able, if you're able to, and this is also explanation of what does it mean, missing dimension of time. I think art precisely does this, missing dimension of time. Because of these obstacles, something is always excluded. But bringing back this something excluded, what is also called, of course, contingencies, then this is a very good work that is, artists can done to start, for the start, because I think art has many different functions. But I think one of the very important things, which is often called by many people new, but I have my own understanding of what newness is by using usually Albert Einstein's beautiful phrase, said, everything new is very well forgotten past. And if you remember, I also talked techniques is very important also because it is what it does, it brought some kind of very important mechanism, but which is not totally inherent for human, because human beings are forgetting. Memory. You know, techniques always helps us to memorize. Very basic timetable, calendar is a technique, yeah, which we take a note in order not to forget. But we are relying on this technique because it helps us. So our remembering of this, remembering things of the past is all we need to talk about. So running again for newness was one of the main problems with modernism, which we talked about before. But it is also fascinating, of course, because this kind of rushing after newness has brought so many beautiful things. That's a paradox, you know. On the one hand, it is poison and remedy, you know, so to speak. Again. So, and also what new, I wanted to say also something, you know, secondly, art, what is art? Art is making, by doing so, by grasping missing dimension of time, images make visible invisible sides of things, you know, or it is, for example, the other side of moon, so to speak, to use this phrase, like Pink Floyd is singing, the darker side of moon. When we see it, but it's never visible, but suddenly it becomes visible. We say, okay, this is something new, but it's actually very well forgotten past. Just to repeat again. So there is not such a thing as a change, but there is making visible things by virtue of techniques and images. Interestingly enough, for example, I just want to bring an example. For example, until Copernicus, which is also like very important for the start of modernism. By centuries, people believed in the Ptolemaic astronomy. That I think it was the sun is revolves around the Earth. You know, people believed in this, and accordingly, but it's very important. Accordingly, all the astronomical ideas and instruments were made according to it worked. It worked. Yes. It worked okay. Since Copernicus, this has changed. So we may see things suddenly changed again. You know, what Karen Barad, you know, it's also a new materialist philosopher, Karen Barad, in her book, very nice book, Halfway to the Universe, says this indeterminacy is such a thing, like it can bring surprises we cannot even, you know, we don't know. But it is very important. But I think in this case, artistic work. Third element I wanted to also talk here, as I talked, there are obstacles. But how to escape these obstacles, or how to make it? I would call this question of angles. From which angle you look at things. Again, with the invention of photography, for example, suddenly it became possible. Actually, for example, portrait. If you look at portraits until Edward Degas, who made drawings of ballet dancers, you will see. Oh wow. Every all sitting right. I mean, it is because of posing mode, or you know, very particular way of sitting, being seated. And Edgar Degas was a very interesting person who was also very interested in all the new inventions. He went to study with Nadar, who was another photographer. Who was his assistant. And when he learned one thing, which he went on to practice for his paintings. That with photography, you can move with the camera. You can point camera in from different angles, you know. And he actually made what he made. Its angles are very important. But what is important is not simply just like this. As I said, it has generated something more interesting. If you read Sergei Eisenstein, as well as watching his films, Sergei Eisenstein, who is very important. Not only for his films, also for his theory of montage, which has become extremely important thing. He was very much inspired by Edgar Degas. He always talked about. He talked about the fact that Degas and Hokusai, who was a Japanese artist, because we start to look from different angles, the same things from different angles. That enables us to see the other side, the hidden dimensions. Dimensions of things. Therefore, and of course, the capacity of assembling, bringing together assembling, which is, of course, following, so to speak, Eisenstein's montage, not only Eisenstein, but one of the making montage very crucial to art making. You know, it is no more genius vision, no more hand gestures of artists, no more the use of, but how you assemble things together. That is 21st century was made. And I think our century has a lot to learn from this in order to bring into this extremely rapidly growing acceleration of new media to find to bring creativity and art into those things. So possibilities of montage, I believe, is non-exhaustive. We must come back to talk about these questions. Also, of course, another question which I did not talk about is, of course, abstraction, which we have to have another session with you, Satyajit, I think.
Yes.
But last thing I wanted to say that also questioning of these things itself. I think we have to stop asking the question, what has to be done? We have to ask the question, how to proceed according to those things which we may know. So, and art is, in this sense, is not about saying, knowing what to do, yes, but also how to proceed. But I think it will be like art, good art does. by transcending those regions which are no more, never dominated by time or space, but by contingencies and conditions indeterminately given to us. I will stop here.
So just to pick up immediately from where you left, because you mentioned that art is not purely to kind of, it's to kind of rather understand how to proceed further and not necessarily the other way around. In that regard, one of the common perceptions is the fact that contingencies are rather always productive. But is it true that contingencies are productive, or are they more neutral and the outcomes are rather productive or destructive in that regard? If you could maybe elaborate a little on
Yeah,
that.
I absolutely agree with the fact that productivity is not really in. Why I said also to ask what has to be done, like how to find the truth. Well, the
Hmm,
truth is also very, contingency is a true. Sudden emergence of things is true. That is why productivity comes from the real truth, which we don't
hmm,
know. We cannot, truth which we know, whatever truth, never really makes us happy also. We
hmm,
always, that's why newness was a very important thing. I
hmm,
absolutely agree with that. But also now I want to go back. I just mentioned in our first session, I talked about Bergson, Henri Bergson, talking about contingencies as science of life. What does it mean? He said, we
hmm,
live life. He was very interested. His very important
hmm,
theory was
hmm,
evolution. But he understood evolution differently from Einstein, of course.
hmm,
Uh, um, he was even labeled like a vitalist. He says, memory,
hmm,
Elan Vitar, yeah, something life.
hmm,
100 years ago, what happened? People living 100 years ago, their memory can be restored in 100 years later by another person. That's also about generationality.
hmm,
So
hmm,
what we do by according to our timetable very carefully is not a
hmm,
life. It is
hmm,
just a
hmm,
construction. Real life is in contingency, sudden surprise.
hmm,
So this is signs of life has to be found in those contingencies. And from here, this idea of what I use often, but Gilles Deleuze used a bit differently, missing dimension. What is missing? Sorry, also the notion of fabulation that Bergson was saying, yeah, the science of life can be brought together in order to have to fabulate differently from, for example, traditional literature. His example was Marcel Proust, right? Marcel Proust, whose remembering of the things of the past is very surreal work, but beautiful work, of course, very important work. So Deleuze was saying that if we talk today about missing dimension of time, not simply just saying, oh, it is wonderful to grasp. No, we're talking about peoples being repressed. It's a very big so it's a very big political question. But what people are about life, living, you know. But we don't live lives when we obey other people's regulations. This is what Hannah Arendt's sentiment I always like to
hmm,
repeat.
hmm, hmm,
In
hmm,
this sense, yes, I would certainly say that is what I liked about Meersu. There are problems with his very good philosopher. There are problems with his way of understanding. Even Louis Mumford, I have
hmm,
some
hmm,
problems. But nevertheless, these are very important things because we have to believe. It is a very good beginning to start to believe that we must recognize contingencies
hmm,
as signs of life,
hmm,
at least in art. Art is
hmm,
a very good space for this reason,
hmm,
I believe.
hmm, hmm.
Therefore, Satyajit, another thing I wanted to talk, but now you brought this question, but probably we will have another time to talk. My message is very important accordingly. So we can become whatever transhuman we may become,
Hmm.
human, uh, this human, this what is the word? This human touch would be very important still. Well,
Hmm.
human should not be sent. I already said before, and I don't know, I'm don't afraid to repeat. We are not center of the world. It is already enough thing to understand. Where we should not be arrogant. Hubris is not good. So we have to understand that techniques will not develop technologies without the human. That is very important. That is why Donna Haraway, its theory is a much close cyborg much closer to me when she says we must think of combination of human and techniques rather than simply techniques working for us. I mean, techniques working for us, disaster. If we have everything going to be artificial intelligence related, then jobs will be lost. Problems will be arising. Already, we have a lot of problems. But contingencies also very humane thing because it's to do with thought.
I'm happy that you brought in this conversation of new maces, especially in this particular regard, because since the past couple of days, I'm not sure if you're aware, ChatGPT has launched a Studio Ghibli filter or Studio Ghibli generation. So effectively, what it does is that you upload an image on ChatGPT, and it throws back that particular image in a Studio Ghibli rendition. And of course, there are two sides to the entire conversation. One is kind of very exciting for a lot of people, but at the same time, the art fraternity is kind of uh, uh, quite on the quite on the fence about it in terms of how there are ethical questions, there are larger ethical dialogues at play over there. In a situation like this, where definitely there are times that with artificial intelligence, with newer technologies, the idea of reproduction of an image, or the reproducibility of an image, not reproduction, but the reproducibility of an image, is completely going haywire, because you can now recreate things in a particular style at scale without even, and which is where artificial intelligence current situation of the ethics around copyrights, the ethics around authorship are becoming increasingly more challenging. Where do you
Absolutely.
s- where do you see the role of the larger creative community at play over here? Because in a time when, and I've seen this happen, where in a time when you have curators, you have writers kind of excessively kind of using ChatGPT to come up with frameworks which have so many jarring loopholes in them, but these kind of projects take shape even at a larger scale. Where
Yes.
do you see the artist community or the creative community responding to it, or how do you see it respond to it?
Yes, a very important question and a very big question. Also, it's going to be
Sorry for
very
that.
important.
Too many things going on.
Definitely, very. But thank you very much for talking about the filtering thing. No, I didn't know about it, but it is, first of all, my own experience. One student from Korea, South Korea, in Austria, when I was doing teaching, she wrote an essay.
Hmm,
During the course, she never said any words, but she sent me her essay. One of the first students,
hmm,
brilliantly written, brilliant essay,
hmm,
and I thought. But we, after all, sorry to say, we're professional. Professionalism is also very important. We know where is the meaning of essay is not just information. There is a thought. That's why I always talk about thought. Not so. I realized, okay, this is. She used ChatGPT, which is very widely used in North Korea. Sorry, South
hmm,
Korea, as you know. And
hmm,
we had to deal with it because it's very important, part especially. But old style.
hmm,
We didn't ban a student because there was an idea of banning, but just well, let's talk to her. That's all. But she was very ashamed of the way. But you see, two things while we speak here. First, thought. Secondly, people being embarrassed. You see, the human thing is still will be there. Secondly, on a much larger level, I was participating in post-human mimesis conference, which also came out as a very wonderful book edited by Nida Schloto, who I mentioned before. I actually will show the book. This is a very important volume. I am very happy to contribute to this volume. And one of the very important critiques of literary theorists,
hmm,
American literary
hmm,
theorists, N. Catherine Hales. who was participating in this conference. She's a very important person. She's an
Hmm.
out of books like My Mother Was Computer, things. And she talked very interesting thing about this particular thing that you say about copyright, etc.
Hmm.
She even thinks that this is when control becomes not such a bad thing.
Hmm.
People should be able to control themselves, right? I think that's
Hmm.
very true.
Hmm.
Of course, control is when you're controlled, terrible. If you can control yourself, it is
Hmm.
very important. But this is ethical question, of course. It is
Hmm. Hmm.
ethical. Politically, I have no answer. I'm for freedom, but but I rely on people's good, ethical attitude towards life. Like people should not steal things. It's horrible.
Hmm.
If stealing should be in this case considered, I am sorry to say, maybe it sounds cruel. It has to be punished by law somehow.
Hmm.
Definitely,
Hmm.
I absolutely agree with that. I will not change my mind. You see, Jean-Luc Godard in 1970s talked about these questions quite a lot, but he has very different meaning, idea. What he
Hmm.
was saying, very interesting. He says, for example, he was saying that people write books, theory books specifically, they quote from elsewhere, but they give
Hmm.
also credit to say, oh, this is comes. I quote a lot of people. I could have not quote them, would sound maybe more clever, but but why? Because this assembling things is very important. It has a dialectic. It is a real natural thing, so to
Hmm.
speak. And
Hmm.
Godard was saying that we should also be able to make films that is um, allowing us to quote other people's, for example, Tarkovsky or Raj Kapoor's game, a play, as an actor, all these things to create a film because he was very interested in this idea. But because it's apparently much more expensive than to make, so to speak, original film. And Godard's resistance was, but any filmmaking is appropriation already. But
Hmm.
unfortunately, this philosophy, this understanding of art, nature of creativity, is not very well taught at our universities, and that is a real problem, Satyajit. So we are speaking about very important question. It is, on the first place, ethical question. Secondly, it is political question, but thirdly, it's a pedagogical question also. I think people should be taught from the beginning how to make sure that, but again, having in your mind that we are not genius, we are appropriating things, but in appropriating things, we can be genius. This is very
Hmm.
important by
Hmm.
giving
Hmm.
credit
Hmm.
to other people too. Now, one
Yes.
more thing I want to say, this question has been very important. One of the questions, for example, if we go back to Greek philosophy,
Hmm.
Socrates, or actually Plato's dialogue, Meno, a very
Hmm.
beautiful dialogue. In
Hmm.
this dialogue is about the fact that can we actually teach virtue? This is about virtue,
Hmm.
really. He says, well, this is a famous piece, yeah, about Socrates walking alongside the sea and seaside, and he asked slave boy to say, does he know what triangle means? And the slave boy making triangle draws on the sand. So, well, he's not educated because slaves were treated well. We know it's a very big question. Then those times. They were not getting education, but this is how he knows about it. He says is somewhere uh, memory of generations that is passed to him. This is very interesting. So this is the same is true about ethics. I think it's passed by generation. If society has a lot of wrong things, when sorry to say, I face this question and I must talk about this. I have a long journey. I'm 62 years now. I hope to be critical a little bit. I have seen a lot of people, academia, never reading Derrida or Deleuze teaching and criticizing all that rubbish. You don't know anything about it. Heidegger, who I mentioned before, he was also a great philosopher, actually. I know it's a very tragic case. He
Yes.
was walking into the uh, a room asking his students, teaching Kant. He says, who didn't read first, second, third critique, just go out. Nobody left because everybody were prepared to learn. This is very important question. So we are in trouble That is why my understanding of images and techniques and contingency in this manner, because we must think of how to find this missing dimension of the world. That is what I think our new mimesis, our theory should be based upon.
You mentioned the role of you mentioned the role of how, um, not role, but you mentioned how a lot of these ideas are kind of, being dismantled in relation to Karen Barad, how, newer ways, newer possibilities. You also brought in the example of Copernicus prior to that, of how, it fundamentally
Yes.
changed the way in which we, viewed the world, and the world before and after were totally different. On the same lines, do you think that because of things like artificial intelligence, because of machine learning, uh, one thing that has quite one idea of the genius, which has kind of held the world at a knife point, let's say for about 1,000 odd years, do you think that is because of things like machine learning and artificial intelligence, the notion of a genius would tangibly get dismantled?
Yes.
Because although we have tried to dismantle it for the past century, it still somewhere kind of creeps in and shows up as an ugly cousin sometimes.
Yes.
Do you
Yes.
think that's going to get dismantled because of AI, or do you think it's going to go on even further?
And that's the very point of all this conversation which you're having. Now back
Yes.
to Kant again. Back to
Yes.
Kant. You know,
Yes.
Immanuel Kant talks about genius. Immanuel
Yes.
Kant talks about genius in the third critique. What he says,
Yes.
well, very briefly, genius is what is genuine. Artist, genius artist, who genuinely can pass his vision onto canvas. Well,
Hmm.
it is can be argued, you know, but of course, uh, we also should add to it that the role of learning, technique, all these things were not talked about during Kant
Hmm.
because Kant
Hmm.
was, but nevertheless, Kant also found very interesting answer to this
Hmm.
synthesis.
Hmm.
To make a synthesis, what Jules Deleuze later called three syntheses of time,
Hmm.
like beginning, middle, end, something like this. But
Hmm. Hmm.
one of the
Hmm.
versions.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, which did not destroy genius,
Hmm.
making synthesis. It was
Hmm.
the first of the technique, but it made the genius person even more interesting. Let us put
Hmm.
it like
Hmm.
this.
Hmm. Hmm.
But with artificial intelligence and what I said, I already mentioned, you see, professor who comes to teach Derrida without reading a book, but he knows that I will say, this rubbish, don't read it because it is not our, you know, not our person. So this kind of
Hmm.
things became dominating in our institutions. This is a
Hmm.
real problem. We are
Hmm.
really in real trouble at the moment in this case. And one of the things that Bernard Stiegler's work, I'm very grateful to him for bringing up this idea, and one of his latest books actually called um, Stupidity and Intelligence in 21st Century. And
Hmm.
stupidity is used here not like a rude word, but it's a
Hmm.
very philosophical explanation
Hmm.
of the fact that knowledge itself is pharmacological. I come back again to it. On the one hand, it is intelligence, yeah, it gives you a lot of possibilities to do things.
Hmm.
On the
Hmm.
other hand, it can also make people stupid.
Hmm.
Bertrand Russell said very interesting thing. He said, people born ignorant, but they're made stupid by education system. It is
Hmm.
Bertrand Russell, very highly positioned Cambridge University philosopher. You know, but what it means is that ignorant meaning here, of course, people don't get, well, tabula rasa thing. Yeah, people are not um, born with the knowledge. Knowledge comes later. People
Hmm.
study.
Hmm. Hmm.
But
Hmm.
university education system can make all of them stupid by teaching them to say, "Oh well, all this doesn't matter," etc. And generation inevitably becomes, "Oh, I can use, artificial intelligence." I'm saying, but you know, Satyajit, we're
Hmm.
talking about artificial intelligence. But I think students coming to read instead of reading real textbooks,
Hmm. Hmm.
specialized in something, reading a
Hmm.
slim books published by American publishers,
Huh.
for example, art for dummies or philosophy in 95 seconds, things like this. Of course, we will have this. This is a problem. This is a real problem. So dismantling of genius is, unfortunately, this is a problem we're going to face, I believe.
You literally dismantled American academia.
Well, I mean, I'm afraid it is a real problem, you know. The American academia, on the other hand, I know a lot of clever people. Karim Barat, for example,
Of
and lots
course,
of
of
people.
course.
You know, I'm not, of course, here, not. So, but there are also this other side. Yeah, it's very
True,
important to understand it.
true.
Something should happen. I think it's a matter of agreement, you know, as I said
Hmm,
before.
hmm, 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 hmm.
Gentleman's pact, you know,
Yeah, which is where you
gentleman's pact.
mentioned how you kind of proceed further is the more important question rather than,
That is it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Procedures. Another thing, the procedures are very important.
Hmm, hmm, hmm,
Because in procedure, we find, you know, you know, real meaning of things that we're talking about. Yeah, I
hmm,
just want to, for example, as an artist, but also as someone who loves literature and theater and cinema, I always think of Hamlet. What makes Hamlet so, Shakespeare's Hamlet, yeah, so fascinating?
hmm,
Yeah, I
hmm,
mean, he does a lot of things. You know, he's talking about not his monologue of to be or not to be. You know, maybe
hmm,
falling
hmm,
asleep and all
hmm,
other sort of philosophical questions. But when he commits certain proceeds, because he kills Laert, yeah, he's
hmm,
planning to kill his father, etc. Here we find, my God, here is this whole meaning of this kind of intentionality of human. You see what I mean? The
hmm,
procedure means a lot in this case.
hmm,
But it is also very contingent usually. A
hmm, hmm,
contingency
hmm,
doesn't necessarily mean, you know, there was a musician, Frank Zappa. I used to be very fond of rock music as
hmm,
well
hmm,
when I was young. I read something about Frank Zappa. That Frank Zappa was always think,
hmm,
I
hmm,
improvise. But
hmm,
actually, later he admitted that before one of his musicians admitted that
hmm.
it's actually the orchestra called the mothers of invention. One of the musicians said, actually, before going to the stage, Frank Zappa forced everybody to repeat the same tune 18 times until it sounds correct. You know, this was the procedure.
Hmm. Yes. I just want to quickly bring up that Studio Ghibli image that I was talking to you about.
Yes, yes.
While we were having the conversation, I just took a
Uh-huh.
screenshot and so this is
I
what,
just saw photograph before, and now I can see I didn't read. So, yeah, please.
yeah. Can you see my screen?
Yes, absolutely, very well.
Yeah. So this is what I mean by the whole ChatGPT Studio Ghibli image production. So
Mm.
you kind of upload. So I just uploaded a screenshot of our conversation, and this
Uh-huh.
is what it kind of throws out.
I see. Okay. Oh my God. Please, can you send it to me also?
Of course, of course.
Please.
I'll share.
Oh, no, fantastic.
I'll send this
That is
across
really
to you.
fantastic. But it's very up to our conversation. Very nice.
Precisely. No, so that's
Yeah.
because it kind of it of course like this is just the kind of beginning, and we're just about grappling with artificial intelligence. So of course it's a very nascent, it's at a very nascent stage to kind of have a very serious dialogue about what could be the possible. uh just a second, let me send this across. Yeah. So what could be the actual repercussions of it? But of course, as time progresses, we'll be able to much more uh,
Yeah.
uh, clearly understand it with, of course, more physical technologies also helping us. But
Yes.
yeah, I think this was a good conversation. I hope we didn't take too much of your time, Zigam.
No, not
And
at all.
yeah, I think we should also, for the viewers who are listening in, please do share your questions, your comments in the comment section below. I think
Yes,
we
please.
can always have one more session, which is kind of maybe responding to those comments. So maybe we could organize a session where there are a number of participants also who can come in and ask more questions. So look forward to that. And thank you so much, Zigam, for doing this. and we shall connect again very, very soon, and for one more session. Hopefully, we can have one or two more people also as a part of that session and open it up. Yeah.
Definitely, definitely. But also, I have my own illusions how to avoid domination of artificial intelligence and dismantling of genius. So we have some more things to talk about. Thank you very much.